Hello, 6th graders. Welcome to Big Ideas Math, Section 2.2, Dividing Fractions lesson. Pause while you write Section 2.2 lesson in your math notebook. Pause while you write today's lesson objective in your math notebook. Today's objective is, I can divide fractions by completing Big Ideas math practice with 100% accuracy in multiple attempts. Now copy the following vocabulary word, definition, and example in your notebook. Be sure to copy everything exactly as it appears on the screen. Today we're going to be working on pages 64 through 66 in your math textbook. Let's start at the top of page 64, and it tells us that two numbers whose product is 1 are reciprocals. To write the reciprocal of a number, write the number as a fraction, then invert the fraction. So the reciprocal of a fraction, a over b, is b over a, where a and b are not 0. So that's a fancy way of saying you turn one of the fractions, you turn the fraction upside down. So you take it and you flip it over. So invert means to turn it over. So you take the fraction on the right, you turn it over, and when you multiply those together, you get 1. Okay? So it's not nearly as hard as it sounds in words. So your study tip over here says the product of a non-zero number and its reciprocal is 1. A over b times b over a equals 1. And that makes sense because when you multiply that, you have a b over b a. And we know that AB is the same as BA, and anything over itself equals 1. So this is also called the multiplicative inverse property, which is a crazy name, but we can call it that anyway. And we'll learn more about that property in Chapter 7, so you have that to look forward to. Let's look at example 1, writing reciprocals. The original number in letter A is 3/5, so we take 3/5 and we flip it over. We use the reciprocal and we check it. 3/5 times 5/3, that would give us 15 over 15, and we know that that equals 1. Letter B, 9/5. We flip that fraction over to get 5/9. 9/5 times 5/9 equals 45 over 45, which equals 1. 2. Remember that every whole number is itself over 1. So 2 over 1 equals 1. Or it doesn't equal, but we take the reciprocal and we multiply that by 1 over 2, or 1/2. So 2 over 1 times 1 over 2 equals 2 over 2, which equals 1. So now you can see why this works. Let's look down at the bottom of the page at the key idea. It says dividing fractions. In words, and you learned this at the end of 5th grade last year, so this isn't a completely new concept to you. To divide a number by a fraction, you multiply the number by the reciprocal of the fraction. So you flip that fraction on the right over and you multiply. So if your numbers are 1/5 and you're dividing 1/5 by 3/4, you leave 1/5 as it is and you take 3/4 and you use the reciprocals, so you flip it over and it becomes 4/3, and then you multiply. So you have 1 times 4 over 5 times 3, and I'm going to go ahead and multiply that out because it equals 4/15. In algebra, it looks like this. So if you're using letters instead of numbers, A over B divided by C over D equals A over B times D over C. So that equals A times D over B times C. And this is a really important note where B, C, and D are not 0, because you are not allowed to have 0 on the bottom of a fraction, because you're not allowed to divide by 0. I want you to take a moment, pause the lesson, and write this in your math notebook because it is a key idea. Now let's turn the page to 65 and take a look at example 2. It says find 1/6 divided by 2/3. So we leave 1/6 alone and we take 2/3 and we use the reciprocal. So we flip it over and rewrite it as 3/2. So our new problem is multiplying 1/6 times 3/2. And remember that we can divide out the common factor of 3, which makes simplifying easier in the end. So we cancel out and we take our 3 and we put a 1. So 3 goes into itself 1 time and 3 goes into 6 2 times. And when we multiply, we have 1 times 1 is 1 and 2 times 2 is 4, which makes our simplifying step so easy that we don't even have to do it. So that makes example 2 super easy. And then we're going to divide a whole number by a fraction. And remember what I said on the last page. Every whole number is itself over 1. That is something that you learned years ago, but sometimes we forget. A piece of wood is 3 feet long. How many 3/4 foot pieces can you cut from a piece of wood? So we are dividing our 3 foot long piece of wood into 3/4 foot pieces. So method 1 is to draw a diagram, which the book has done for us off to the left, and mark each foot on the diagram, then divide each foot into 1/4 foot sections and count out the 3/4 foot pieces of wood. There are 4. So you can cut 4 3/4 foot pieces. That's what we did yesterday in the activity, was we drew models. Today we are going to divide 3 by 3/4 to find the number of 3/4 foot pieces. So we take 3/4 and we flip it over. We get the reciprocal of 3/4, which is 4/3, and then we multiply. 3 over 1, and since it's a 1, the book is leaving it out because you know that in your head, and you're in 6th grade now. You don't have to write everything. So 3 over 1, and then we get to divide out the common factor of 3. 3 goes into itself one time, 3 goes into itself one time. So you end up with 1 times 4 on the top and a 1 on the bottom. So 1 times 4 is 4, and there's a 1 on the bottom, so 4 over 1 equals, it's a 1, 4 over 1 equals 4, which is what the book had. I just wanted you to see why. So our simplifying is super easy again. So you can cut 4 3/4 foot pieces from the piece of wood. So moving on to page 66, we are on example 4, and now we're dividing a fraction by a whole number. Again, we have to remember that every whole number is itself over 1. So 4/5 divided by 2, we take 2 and we put it over 1. So we're writing it as an improper fraction. And then we need to multiply by the reciprocal of 2 over 1, which is 1/2. So when we do that, our new problem looks like this, 4/5 times 1/2. So again, we're going to divide out the common factor of 2, which makes simplifying easier in the end. 2 goes into itself one time, 2 goes into 4 2 times. So 2 times 1 is 2, and 5 times 1 is 5. So our answer is all simplified, 2/5, and we're done with number 4. Please remember, if there are any of these that give you any trouble, you need to be sure you mark them down, listen to the lesson a second time, mark it on your exit slip if it's still a problem, and ask me in class. Finally, let's look at example number 5, using order of operations. We're asked to evaluate 3/8 plus 5/6 divided by 5. Remember that we multiply and divide from left to right before we add and subtract. So we are going to do the division part of this problem before we do the addition. So we multiply by the reciprocal of 5, which is 1/5. So our new problem looks like this, 3/8 plus 5/6 times 1/5. So we divide out the common factor of 5, and we have 1 times 1 on the top and 6 times 1 on the bottom. So our next problem is 3/8 plus 1/6, because our multiplication turned out to be 1/6. And then we have to rewrite fractions using a common denominator, because we cannot add fractions if they don't have the same denominator, and our common denominator is 48. So we have 18/48 plus 8/48. And when we add that, we get 26/48, and we simplify to get 13/24. Now we need to read the study tip. It says you can use the LCD, which, remember, that stands for lowest common denominator or least common denominator, 24, to add the fractions in example 5. So that's how we did that. Remember, to earn credit for reviewing this flipped lesson, you need to complete your notes in your interactive student notebook, Complete your on your own questions in your interactive student notebook and submit those in Google Forms, and complete your Big Ideas math assignment in your math notebook, and be sure you submit that when it is 100% correct. Be sure to visit your teacher if you have any questions.